if you have the amount of dollars and you have the amount of stuff that the dollars can buy at the same aggregate price level, then there should be no inflation. And so this is basically what is concluded. Those who think that this would cause inflation are confused, which is a polite way that economists say that other economists are wrong. So, I won't go through this. Okay, so three key words in the Need Act is equity. We've sort of covered that with a net asset, or it's a residual leftover assets minus liabilities, net worth, bailment. Now that is the legal term for something that is your something you own, your possession, but you put it in the trust of someone else, like a self-storage garage. You know, the chairs and tables are still yours, but you're storing them in someone else's place, like a bank. You're storing your money in a bank's custodial account, like an electronic safe deposit box. So that's what that means. So it just has to be, you know, it's a legal term, and it has to be in the bill language. And fiduciary, that just means people have a legal responsibility to look after your interests, not their own interests. Okay, and that's what banks are supposed to do, and they do that in certain, you know, for escrow accounts and looking after estates and things like that, being executors for estates. They do that, so they know how to do that, and there are rules and regulations about all of that as well. Okay, well, I better stop now before we get into the technical stuff, and because we better hear from Randi Cook about the value of money, or I hope I've got that right. Randy's going to explain really, really well about the value, not the value of money, the value of the wealth that money represents. So, and then we can come back to this later. So I hope that's whetted your appetite, and if you want more, we can come back to it when we have time. Or you can email me. Through Ibrahima, you can email me, and we can get and Sue runs a group here studying all this, so we can answer questions if you have them. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, 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 hello.
Is it on? Is it on?
Hello, 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 hello. Are you on? Yeah, the light is on. Okay.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for that great information. The next speaker is Randi Cook, who is in town from Michigan. And Randi is going to talk about wealth and the value of wealth. But more than that, he's going to give you the basics of a parity economy and where the history of that comes from. And And in the process, he's really going to explain how an economy works to put earned income into all of our pockets, which it doesn't do now. A good part of the reason, major part of the reason, is the current monetary system of debt money created by private banking corporations. But in addition, how does money get distributed into the homes of all of Americans? How can that happen so we can all have really good lives? So, Randi, are you around?
Gotta give him a minute.
He's coming.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Sure.
Randi, do you want these slides?
Those slides would be helpful if we can get in.
Yeah, and then just page down. Yep, right. Oh, okay, all right. Excellent. Let me grab my critter notes. I'm Randy Cook. I am the president of the National Organization for Raw Materials. We've been around since 1936. We were called, early on, we were called the Raw Materials National Council. And under that name, the original research, what brought us into existence was an original piece of research by some guys out in Iowa. And they started off with a question in their head. Their own personal experience was that during the Great Depression, corn as a commodity, yeah. Corn was selling for, let's say 50 cents one day, and a week later it wouldn't bring 10 cents. And so the fellows sitting there looking at the situation said, you know what is going on? It's 56 pounds. A bushel of corn is, about this big around, about that deep. It's filled with these little kernel things here. And it weighs 56 pounds at about 14% moisture. And it has so many thousands of calories in it if you were to throw it into your stove and burn it or eat it. The calories given up are the same. And they're the same this week as they were last week. Why was it worth 50 cents last week and 10 cents this week? And so they began to obtain the economic records statistically of the production of commodities, of the consumption of commodities, the prices at which commodities were traded, and they began to follow these numbers from 1890s up through the 1930s. They began to find patterns in the numbers. And what they discovered was that the wealth that we produce in the country is what puts the value in our money. That's the key element that they discovered, and it has a particular relationship. We need to understand what we mean by wealth, what I mean by wealth. These are the things I mean when I say these words. Wealth is not money. Wealth is a flow of energy that supports human life. That's what it is, because we are humans, we are defining wealth. To us, wealth is something that obeys the laws of physics. It rots, it rusts, it decays. It's alive, and it is only serving us for a while, and then it can't serve us anymore, and we have to replace it with more new wealth. Money is a claim on wealth. It is not wealth. And that's simple enough. You can see when you go into the grocery store, if milk costs $1 a gallon and you got a silver dollar in your pocket and you walk into the store and you grab the milk and you go to the checkout and you fail to give your silver dollar up, they're going to stop you when you leave the building. Usually with guns raised and things, they're going to say, hey, you have to pay for the milk. You either have the money or you have the wealth. The money buys the milk, the wealth, and the milk buys the money. It's an exchange. That's all it is. So that's what I mean about money. Now, capital is wealth, but it's identified as capital in my world when we use it to produce either more new wealth or new capital. But capital is the product of labor, and labor deserves much the higher consideration. Has anybody ever seen that phrase before?
Yes.
Do you know where it came from?
Progress and poverty. Henry George.
It came before that. In 1861, it was written in the annual message to Congress by Abraham Lincoln.
Oh.
At the end, look that up because that's a wonderful piece of information. it used to be the State of the Union address was called the annual message to Congress. And when Lincoln was first elected, the first message to Congress was December 3rd, 1861. And he wrote the basic synopsis of how the country was doing. You know, the revenues were up because of this and that, and the expenses were down because of that. You know, he's just giving a synopsis. It's the message to Congress by the chief administrator of the federal government. And so he's giving an overall picture of what the country looks like. And he comes to the end and he says, I want to draw your attention to something that nobody's paying much attention to. And he said, this is the effort to place capital on an equal footing with, if not above, labor in the structure of government. And he says, I want to call your attention to this effort, because if you give it up, he says, it will be used, you beware of surrendering a power you already possess, which if surrendered, will be used to erect new burdens and disabilities upon you until all of liberty shall be lost. And I think we're standing pretty close to that hot rock right now. Now the last one, parity here, this is the equal exchange value between segments of the economy. And what I mean by segments of the economy is what Simon Kuznets did in the original national income accounting back in the 1920s, when they began to try to measure the condition from year to year of the national government. And Kuznets came up with a six-part accounting. Let me see if I've got it in here somewhere. Oh yeah, well, we're familiar with that. And the coining money. And the states, by the way, that's, you know, the states are prohibited. I might say something about this later, because with the way the money system goes right now, in my view, the federal government has failed its obligation constitutionally to provide for the money. And if you stop and think about the Constitution, it was the product of the states and the people. So if the federal government fails its constitutional obligation, whose shoulders does it fall upon to cover that failure, if not the states? Is it not incumbent upon the states to step forward and tell the federal government, you have failed of your constitutional responsibility, get your butt in gear? And what is an effective way to do that, particularly concerning the monetary system, other than recognizing that coining money may be necessary by a state because the feds have failed to do so? And if any state stepped forward and said, okay, here we're going to produce United States notes, New York, and we're going to issue them on this basis, and we're going to, you know, maintain their value under the, whatever it is. If New York was to do that, the conversation would begin. We would have a conversation. But anyway, this is the national income accounting according to Kuznets. There are 6 categories in his thing. This one is wages, salaries, and supplements, and this is net interest, and the combination of these two is called the expense side, cost. And these 4 are the revenue side, and they're corporate profits before tax, rental incomes to persons, which includes copyrights and patents, unincorporated or small business, and farm. So these are the revenue side. And as you can see here, adding together the percentages, these numbers here on this line, the percent share line here, comes to 28.3% revenue, and here is 71.7% cost. That was 2017. And the numbers below it, these are the increase from the 1947 to 49 average. But in the 47 to 49 period, I don't have it on here, but it should have been right up in here. The numbers, this would have been 66.6, and this would have been 33.4. In other words, the 47 to 49 period was a balanced period in our economy. We were earning our way. Debts were diminishing. Business was expanding. Unemployment was shrinking. Count up the characteristics of prosperity, however you want to look at them. That's what we had in the 47, 48, 49 period. And the ratio between cost and revenue in the national income was 2/3 cost, 1/3 revenue. We're not there now. You can see how it has shifted. And the biggest shift has been, if you look at these things, this is the increase of each of these segments since the 47 to 49 average. Net interest has gone up 13,409%. Farm income, net farm income has gone up 152%. What kind of a thing do you think that's going to put agriculture in as far as being able to pay its own way? Is there any wonder that the countryside is being emptied out? You know, without the ability to earn, without the money coming into circulation, which is what parity does, it establishes the value of our money by the wealth we produce. And this is the concept that I want to try to communicate to you, is what we would like to see happen. We think this is what makes good money good, is that the wealth we produce puts the value in the money. We do not allow money to determine the value of our wealth. Have I confused everybody? Because that's, domestically, in order to keep the value of our wealth in the money at a constant rate so that the buying power of our money stays constant from year to year. Now, it doesn't have to be right smack dab down to the penny, but it has to be pretty close. And we tried to do this. We recognized in the Great Depression of the 1930s, that's where this came from, by the way. Title VII, Section 601, is declared the disruption of the orderly exchange. This came right on May 12th, 1933, right there. It was an emergency declared by Congress because they received telegrams. They had piles of, you've seen the what's the Jimmy Stewart movie where he gets,
It's a Wonderful
yeah, that's the one. Oh, no, not the Wonderful
Mr.
Life.
Smith Goes
Yeah,
to
Mr.
Washington.
Smith Goes to Washington, that's the one, where they put all the telegrams down in front of that was the Senate, of course, but, anyway, yeah, the states were sending telegrams to Washington saying the situation out here in the countryside is dire. This is 1933. It's dire out here. You have to do something now. Now. Do it. We don't care what it is, do it, because we're hurting out here. The banks are shut. We can't pay for anything. We've got wealth. We don't have money. My dad used to say, you weren't poor, you just didn't have any money. There's a difference. And nobody gets much of that these days. So anyway, the emergency was declared. And because what they said, it destroys the value of the agricultural assets underpinning the national credit structure, and that these conditions affect transactions in agricultural commodities with the national public interest. That is a Fifth Amendment taking right there. We have taken this national public interest means that we, the federal government, now get to, because these conditions burden and obstruct the normal channels of interstate commerce, it is declared to be the policy of Congress, through the exercise of the powers under this chapter, establish and maintain orderly marketing conditions in interstate commerce, as will establish parity prices. 1933. There you go. That's current law today. And I can tell you what the parity ratio is on the farm right now. It's 30. The farmers are paid 30 cents on the dollar. Parity means you're paid 100 cents on the dollar. But farmers right now, this is the average for agriculture. Now, you can't look at any farmer and say, would you like parity? Then they'll look at you and say, what? I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're talking about. It's the agricultural portion of the economy that's being paid 30 cents on the dollar. For every dollar's worth of wealth agriculture puts into our economy, we pay them 30 cents. So all the work you do, take 1/3 of your salary and walk home with it today instead of your full paycheck. Try and make your plans on that. That's what we're forcing agriculture to do right now today in this nation. That's why we've got cheap food. That's why we've got crappy food. That's why our soil is going bad. That's why we're willing to tolerate genetic modifications of foods, of animals, of crops, is because the low pay means that the industrial machinery can do whatever it wants, because that's where the money sits. The money sits in the industrial end of things, not in the individual agricultural end, not in the farmer's hand. If the farmer were in charge, we wouldn't have to worry about soil depletion. We wouldn't have to worry about bad crops, bad treatment of any animal. There's no farmer I know of that wants to mistreat any animal. He only wants to get paid. Wants to get paid properly. Let's keep going here because I want to get to the trade. This is what the parity ratio has done. The parity ratio is actually you take the index of prices received divided by the index of prices paid over the years, and this is what it looks like. This little hump right here in the 1970s, early 70s was when Nixon closed the gold window at the Fed. And what happened was a lot of foreigners, the French and the Russians in particular, had Federal Reserve notes that they had been bringing to the, oh, it's not bringing up well, sorry. Okay. The Federal Reserve notes in the hands of foreign governments had been being brought to the gold window of the Federal Reserve Bank, and gold was being taken away. And when Nixon closed the gold window in August of '71, the Federal Reserve notes that were in the foreign hands had no gold to fetch. They couldn't get gold anymore, so they took whatever it was we had that they could buy with it. You know, that's the thing about a foreign transaction. How do I get paid? You know, if I'm selling American-made stuff to somebody in Andorra, I don't take French currency because it won't spend. I can't deposit it at my bank. I have to pass it through some foreign exchange account somewhere. And so how do I get paid? You know, so that's the question of foreign trade. And the number of dollars, the exchange rate, all of that stuff has to be likened to similar thing versus similar thing. It's an equitable exchange. How do you evaluate how much I should be paid in French francs versus what I would be paid in American dollars? And what we've discovered over the years is that essentially for every dollar's worth of import we do in this country, we lose about $3 of our national income. Doesn't matter what it is we import. Whether we could produce it here or whether we couldn't produce it here. We are capable here in this country of running a 97% self-reliant economy. 97%. Very, very few other spots on the face of this planet can say that. We also have the labor, and we have the skills, or at least we used to have. We're quickly depleting ourselves of some of this stuff because we won't pay people to do the right thing because of the way the money comes into existence. And so because we're able to run it, we don't need to import that much stuff. most people want to buy what we have, but they don't have enough money to buy what we would price it at. And so when we sell it in a foreign market, we sell it at a lower value, lower number. And so the question is, how much do we need to charge when a foreign product comes in here to cover up what we lost the last time we sold something overseas? That's the point of equitable trade. All we do is we simply keep track of how much we lost the last time we sold something overseas, and the next thing that comes in gets to pay the difference. We calculate it out. We can even arrange it on a different basis if you wanted to and say, okay, we will anticipate how much it would cost to produce that thing here. And then we'll say, okay, anybody who wants to bring it in, you want to import a new car out of China. And our car here costs $40,000, and you want to bring that one in here for $20,000, then the price of our car being 40, equivalent product for product, then we're going to put a $20,000 import on that imported car because that's what our price requires. And what we'll do is we'll take that $20,000 and we'll put it in an account right here at the border. And we'll say to the Chinese, you have 12 months to use that balance in that account to buy anything we got. That's all it is. That's equitable trade. We use our price, our values, our wealth puts the buying power in our money. Domestically, we do that through the parity pricing for the raw materials. Agriculture is 70% of the annual raw materials we consume comes right off our farms. 70%. That's why we can put ag parity in the jar and balance the economy without having to worry about iron ore or oil or steel, copper, manganese, any of these things. We can cover most of the problem with agriculture. And the curiosity of all this stuff is, we actually did this from 1942 through 1952 in this country. We established the policies. Our group, in fact, the Raw Materials National Council, a man named Carl Wilkin, at one time held the record for hours of testimony before Congress of any human being. And he essentially instructed Congress how to do this, how you put parity back in ag. And we did it. We did it from 1942 through 1952. And because it worked so well, it regulated the value of the purchasing power of the money. It regulated it to better than 1% accuracy for 11 years in a row. And then we decided interests in Congress decided that this was too stable. This was not advantageous to money lending, to debt financing. International finance capitalism reached out its little arm from under the pile and started tweaking things, and we have what we have today. So that's the overview of what we at NORM do is we keep track of all these statistics. We keep researching the numbers, national income numbers, which are getting harder to do because they do GDP now. And the relationship between national income, gross national product, and gross domestic product are really quite astonishing if you ever sat down and looked at the differences. But in order to calculate GDP, they have to start with national income. They take national income and they make adjustments, additions and subtractions. They come up with gross national product. And then more additions, subtractions, including the rest of the world. And you come up with gross domestic product. And, but like I say, you have to calculate national income. And that's what we look at. We look at national income, and the statistics there are based on gross farm income. Cash receipts from farm marketings is what I call it. And it puts the buying power in our money, and it keeps us solvent if we put it at 100% of parity. It's a simple thing to do. The laws are still on the books, as you saw. And so tariffs, parity tariffs, as we call them, at the border because it's our economy. It's our nation's money. People call it the world reserve currency. Well, good, fine, call it whatever you want. That's the banker's advantage, not ours. We have our economy, we have our costs, we have our capital structure, we have our investments that we have put into things. One of the reasons that the United States paid the highest wages following World War II was because of all the investment we had made behind every worker in this land. Roads, factories, machine tools, all of it. And with that kind of an investment, you have to pay more wages per hour to cover that investment. We have the highest wage rate in the world. Why would we trade that away? Why would we say we need cheaper food? That's like saying to the farmer, you know, please cut off your right arm and try and work a little faster if you would. It doesn't make sense. You know, it doesn't make sense. But we stood for it. We took it, we accepted it as a thing to thinking we were going to do better with it. And it doesn't make any sense. We have to maintain our values. We put our values by wealth production into our money, and then we have to keep it in our money at the border so that we'll trade with folks, anybody who wants to, we'll trade with them. But we do it on an equitable basis where we protect our purchasing power of our money. And that's all there is to it. And at that point, we're happy to help anybody out. You know, that's my attitude anyway. So, well, that's me, Randy Cook, and Norm. So if you have questions.
Wait, I want to get my question in first.
Excellent.
Can you explain when Norm says all wealth comes from the earth and how that affects the whole economy?
All right. Well, I don't know whether I can do the last part, but I can certainly tell you what we mean by all new wealth comes from the soil. In fact, we have a book that was actually published in 1957, and then I did a 50th anniversary reprint of it. I may have a couple of copies in the one anyway. I got one. All new wealth comes from the soil. In 1957, this is Carl Wilkin, the fellow who did the original research. Yeah, 1957. Anyway, there's a lot of numbers and charts and things in here. We got all kinds of stuff from years past. This book, of course, was published in 1957, so the statistics only go through about 1955, 53 to 55. But I maintain spreadsheets with all of this stuff brought up to 2017, 2018. One of the curiosities is you can look up on the USDA website, the National Ag Statistics Service, nass.usda.gov, and locate cash receipts from farm marketings for 2020. Isn't that good? Yeah. That's correct. They estimate it, and then they refine their estimate as the numbers come in over the years.
I think mine.
Did I answer the question?
No.
Oh, I apologize. How does all new wealth come from the soil? Well, the point is that the resources around us. I mean, we live in a planet. We are part of nature. All new wealth, and as I said, wealth is a flow of energy sustaining human life. And so these bodies are physical. They need food. They need air. They need water. You know, they need these hierarchy of needs, shelter and clothing. And we need social contact. We need communities. And so You know, I've heard it said that it's possible for a human being to precipitate nutrients directly into your bloodstream. I've heard that that's possible. I can't do that. I'll hold out for the possibility.
Capitalism?
No, mental precipitation, you know, just make stuff appear directly into your bloodstream. But I can't do that, so I've got to eat food. And my food comes out of the ground, out of the air, you know, it's a physical product, and I have to support the people who are willing to feed me, because I can't produce all the stuff I need. We have a division of labor. And as soon as we get a division of labor, we go towards a money system, because that's the only way we can apportion what each of us has contributed. That's how I see money. Money to me is owned by, issued by the community. It's not my money, it's our money. It has to be our money. You may have some of it, and you may want to call that yours, but it belongs to the community because it circulates through the community, keeping various people going, exchanging, wealth changing hands. And when it finally circulates back into the original place where it came from, that's what I would call the treasury. It came out of the treasury, and originally, this is how I would propose that it come out, is in parity pricing of raw materials. The first point of sale, when well, should I get it?
I thought your graph showing the parity price falling over the years, very interesting. It goes from 52, the end of the actual parity support, to present, and yet it's defined in terms of 1910 to 1914, and yet it was still 100 in 1952. Very interesting.
In fact, there were 3 parity periods in the 20th century. 1910 to 14 was the first one. Technically, it was from August of 1910, or excuse me, August of 1909 to July of 1914. That was how it was first used in the statistical basis. And they call it, shorten it, 1910 to 14. The second was 1925 to 29. That was a parity period for the economy. And the third one was 1941 through 1952. But in order to avoid an association with the wartime economy, we can use 1947 to 49. And the federal government did, in fact, in the very first economic report of the president, which was issued in 1947, that's what they used as a base reference period for the entire national economy. It was 47 to 49.
And once again, what is the definition of the ratio?
The index of prices received, USDA keeps track of, they keep an index where they calculate what things a farmer sells as agricultural wealth into the market. Markets don't start until somebody offers it for sale. You have to grow it, you have to tend it, it's all speculative essentially. Every crop that a farmer produces is all on spec.
I hope you're going to sell it.
I hope it's going to come in. You know, you got weather and floods and who knows what, bugs and everything. So that's the original risk. When banks talk about risk mitigation, I say, bend over, fellas, you ain't seen nothing. But they get their risk handled. The farmer has to handle his own risk, the original risk, plus all the lending risk that the bankers want to shove on him too. And these days it even goes through insurance. There's an insurance mandate in the most recent farm bills. But the index of prices received, and they're all calculated out, which crops, livestock and milk and dairy and everything. And that's placed, and that's kept according to that base period, the index number. Have you ever calculated index numbers? Yeah, well, we all kind of have an idea what that's about. It was a big effort back in the, Wilkin also published another book called Prosperity Unlimited, The American Way, which I think was published in 1947, in which all the charts he put in the book were all according to the same legend. They all had the same numbers on the side. It was all index numbers. And it was all the same index
So
numbers.
if I could just try
Focus
to get
me.
it to,
Uh-huh.
what is the ratio, what divided by what?
Index of prices received divided by index of prices paid.
By whom?
The farmer.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, Randy. This whole idea is really new to me, so I'm trying to get my head around it.
Gotcha.
Very generally, you probably know statistics better than I do, but roughly in 1900 in America, some percentage of Americans were engaged in agriculture, and I think it was very high, 80% plus or minus. In 1900?
1900 wasn't quite that high. It was close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Today, I believe it's something like 2 to 3% of Americans are engaged in agriculture, which means in effect that almost all of our food is produced by large multinational corporations.
Correct.
Okay.
Well,
Now-
easy. It's
Okay.
no. It's sold to you by large multinational corporations. It is not produced by those corporations.
But if only 2 or 3% of people
Mhm.
in total are engaged in agricultural activities, it says to me only 2 or 3% of the human beings are doing it,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Okay. So now
Yep.
here's the issue. Now, if suddenly we go from a parity of say 30% to $1,
Mm-hmm.
if we could go to 100% parity tomorrow,
Right.
to oversimplify the question I'm raising is, wouldn't almost all of that increase in income go to these large
Right. Corporations.
corporations?
Some would, not all by any means, and my guess is the bulk of it would not. Because the way the structure of farming, it's easy to get confused about the structure of agriculture in this nation because of the overrepresentation of the agribusiness entities. And there are a lot of large producers, but most of them, if they have a corporate structure, it is simply an LLC for legal liability limitation. It's still a family-operated farming business who has adopted an LLC structure. They're still facing the same difficulties as all the rest of the family farm producers. They're just they've taken the advice of the agricultural experiment stations, my dad's old job was extension agent from a land-grant university. He was supposed to go out and tell farmers how to do it better. Here's how you do it better. And that was what he did. He went around and showed people how to get bigger. Buy a bigger truck, you'll be better. Bigger truck. Well, he wasn't satisfied with that, but he did it nonetheless. But that's what's been sold. Be bigger. And so the farmers have tried to be bigger. And what they found out that is, doesn't matter how big your truck is, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. That's the story of the industrialization of ag, and it doesn't work. Agriculture is not an industry. Agriculture is a biological process. It's like digestion. We can build robots that digest food. What good is that going to do us? I need to digest my own food. I can't have some robot do it for me. So that's what we've done. We've separated ourselves from understanding what's really necessary for us to do. So the large ag corporations or agribusiness entities they will receive some of that income, but the point to the way the parity program works, it says that at the first point of sale. And the big agribusiness entities don't usually. Now in some livestock, pork and poultry, that's different. They have integrated those so that all the farmer does, all the producer does now, is own the facilities and pays the Smithfield's Foods for the chicks that he puts in his little 10,000 layer house. And beyond that, he has to buy all the feed. He signs a contract and he gets paid a certain amount, and that's all there is to it. So yeah, some of that, but the parity program works not through putting a price on every agricultural product. It works on what's called the bulk. The bulk of agriculture is in about 5 crops: cotton, corn, wheat, these days soybeans, and barley. Used to be oats. Those are the bulk of the production, and the pricing means that they produce the bulk of the income. They're the bulk or program commodities under the 7 U.S.C. 602. And so we don't deal with poultry there. What happens is, what we found out through the practice of this parity program is that other items, whether it's livestock, whether it's fruit, whether it's vegetables, all these other things will find their own happy relationship when everybody else is not hurting for income. When you have enough, you can enter into equitable exchanges with everybody else. And everybody finds their happy spot. We can find out what a good price for broccoli is when wheat is being paid at parity these days, which is about $18. Which curiously is about what we say, that when you set a minimum wage number, it should be set at the parity price of a bushel of wheat, which is about $18.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. And just building on that question, I'm just trying to understand one point here. So, since we know that the number of workers or individuals involved in agricultural production has dropped over the last century, but we also know that there's been significant efficiencies and productivity that have been gained in technologies like fertilizers and equipment, like you mentioned, and large scale, et cetera, et cetera. But doesn't that play in here at all? Because in many other industries, whether it's computing or telecommunications or many other industries, that's what we've seen over the last 100 years is significant price erosion or changes in the dynamics of the marketplace for those industries because of the gains in productivity, efficiency, technology. I just wonder, does that play any effect here or not?
It does. In fact, you've answered your own question. The point is that the technological improvement affects nearly all the industries or portions of the economy to an equal degree. Maybe a little more this year, next year. It's not specific to one kind of work in the economy.
So then, because what I am hearing is that you seem to be saying that this decline of parity is not a beneficial thing, but yet I'm wondering is it a natural thing, right? In other words, as you get better, better, faster, cheaper, then this parity index
of those three, better, faster, cheaper, you can have two. Pick two. I don't care. You can't have all three.
Actually, not my experience, but okay, I won't argue the point.
Well,
but,
not in agriculture. Let me say it that way.
Okay, all right. I'm not a farmer.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. But I'm just curious if wouldn't that somehow explain part of this and really cause it to be something that you have to accept, essentially. Instead of saying, look, we don't like it that it's gone down.
Right.
Actually, in many industries, you have to actually change the scale completely over time, right? Over sometimes even just a decade, you have to make a change like this. And so I don't know, I get it, I understand it, I understand what you're saying.
I hear you.
But I wonder if this is not actually a natural phenomenon that maybe you have to adjust the whole picture here to accept it.
I would submit that it is the unnaturalist of products, because the nature, what we're seeing now in the nature of our health care, our health risks, our disease risks, our cancer rates, nutritionally caused health problems, and the genetic modification, which is irresponsible in my view. It's people playing tinker toys with things they really don't understand. And the genetic modification both of the crops and of the livestock and things like that, the management techniques applied in all kinds of things. That's why I was saying it's a biological process in agriculture, not an industrial one. And there's no way we can expect that industrial application of management techniques can be beneficial to agriculture unless they are specifically adapted for the realities of agricultural production. So I would submit that it's an analytic tool using a management perspective coming from industry is inappropriate for deciding whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I think we have to come up with some other basis on which to decide whether or not there's a certain segment of our population that we must depend upon. Do you produce enough food to eat yourself? If you don't, then you've got to depend on someone else to do that. And what is the best arrangement there, both economically and morally? You know, is it best for me to adopt the old slave production process and just buy some people and put them to work? You know, that's capital acquiring labor to work for me. And I don't think that's tenable. I think here in the United States we started out with a different approach, although that was an ingredient of us at the time we started. We did eventually throw off some of those blinders and paid a lot of blood and treasure to change. So I think we should honor that in some fashion and essentially say that, yeah, we need to do it a better way. So better, cheaper, faster, you know, is, like I say, in ag you can only have two of those, because the third one will always be sacrificed. Have I spoken at all to your concern?
I get you, and I think there's also questions.
So Randy, I come out of this experience of hearing your explanations with two questions, and one of them is pretty simple, straightforward, and I want to hold it, and that's how to get that line back up to the. Okay.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure that I understood your relationships there of the 15%, of the 30% to the 100%, and you express them. And you express them as prices received versus the prices paid.
Okay.
Just hit it. What? No.
Make sure I got that right.
Yeah, that's great.
That's not doing it. All right, there it comes.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So in terms of that graph, okay,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the ratios that were coming down,
Mhm.
you explained those as the price received by the farmer versus the prices paid by the farmer.
Correct.
Okay?
Yep.
So I'm just saying, in my little mind, it's the cost to the farmer. Okay?
Yes, right.
Okay? So
The prices of that you have to pay have risen faster than the prices I've received.
right,
over
exactly.
time, yes.
And my point here goes to this gentleman's question is that if there were efficiencies and productivities and everything like that had an impact of affecting something on that input side, it would drag down the price, the cost
Sure.
of producing the agriculture, okay?
Exactly.
And you would still be trying to maintain the parity side of it in terms of the price that they receive, okay?
Yep.
So if I understand that, then I go back to my original question, which is, you know, there's how many years of 65 years of deterioration in the ability of the family farm to stay in business, and what will it really take? We've got the law, you say, is still in effect. You know, the law that says there has to be a relationship, and yet we don't have the relationship. What does it take to turn that around? Because that's what we're going to have to eventually incorporate into monetary reform, I feel.
Right. Yeah, well, I can explain the way it works, or the way it worked last time it was employed, when it functioned from following the war. In 1942, after the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, the Congress adopted an amendment to the Emergency War Price Stabilization Act called the Stegall Amendment. And what they did, they changed some of the parity rates, loan rates around in it, and included some more items on the list of things that were supposed to be programmed crops. But the biggest thing that the Stegall Amendment did was extend by law the parity ag policy for 2 years following the stated end of hostilities. And on December 31st, 45, Harry Truman declared the war was over. So for 46 and 47, the parity policy continued under law, under the Stegall Amendment. And 48 was an election year. You remember Dewey defeated Truman? You see Harry Truman with the Chicago Tribune? Yeah. So nothing happened with ag policy in 48. 49, they passed what's now called the permanent legislation, which changed the parity program in two fashions. One, installed what's called a rolling base period, so that instead of this 1910 to 14 base period, nowadays they say we don't care what the conditions are in the economy. Every 10 years we're just going to draw a line, call everything zero, and move ahead. Who cares what it was like? If it was bad, so what? We don't care. And number two was what they call sliding parities, where they said that in times of short crops we will support the markets at 90% of parity, and in times of full crops, bumper crops, we will support the markets at 60% of parity. That's called sliding parity. And the Secretary of Agriculture, Branahan, wrote a letter to Congress and said, "You idiots, this is upside down. You need to support the markets when there's a bumper crop to guarantee the income that the nation needs to exchange and process and distribute the wealth, because this is where all of our earnings come from." The national income has been lockstepped at 7 times the gross farm income well, it still works today. That's why we have so much debt in this country, is because the earnings of agriculture, earnings, not borrowings, earnings of agriculture are so meager because of this 30% parity deal that all the money we need to exchange the wealth we produce, process it, distribute it, consume it, has to be borrowed, because there's not enough money in circulation without borrowing more to cover the shortfall. Jamie?
So Randy, just this 65-year period, has the difference been made up by just rolling over debt? Farms basically just rolling over debt? Is that how they've been?
To some degree, when they can. If not, they get sold off, liquidated, and incorporated into larger agricultural units. Yeah, some farm. There's a lot of jokes amongst farmers about who's going to be the last farmer in the county. Seriously, and it's gallows humor is what it is. You know, the number of suicides and things that are going around in agriculture these days is unconscionable, but it's a symptom of the failure to recognize who butters our bread. We haven't paid the husbandman.
Randy, I have a request. There's a story you told me once that really made sense and was really important for me to understand parity, which is that people who understand parity know that it supports the income of all the sectors of the economy. They know that we would have prosperity and we would have less and less debt.
Right.
What happened with Carl Wilkin educating the states
Right.
about parity, and then when the Japanese
Mm-hmm.
bombed us, what happened in Congress?
Right.
I think it's an important piece of history.
Okay, yeah, this research was the relationship between gross farm income and national income at what he just explained originally, what they saw in the statistics was $1 of gross farm income was equated and produced $1 of industrial payrolls and $7 of national income. And whenever the farm income went up, industrial wages went up, and national income went up 7 times. When gross farm income fell, industrial payrolls fell, dollar for dollar, and national income fell $7 for every dollar of gross farm income that was missing. And they watched it, and there was nothing about parity in this analysis. That's just the numbers. Gross farm income, industrial payrolls, and national income. That's all they looked at. You can look at it from it's in the book, from 1928 through 1938, 39, 40. There's a chart in that 1941 publication I've got. And that's what it shows. And so it's just lockstep. And so that's parity periods, balanced parity periods, non-balanced disparity periods. It just worked that way. Nowadays, we've fudged all the statistical numbers, so we can't even find industrial payrolls in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There isn't such a number. It's not there anymore. And partly because what you were mentioning is that industry has changed so much that industrial wages, at least what they were back then in the 30s, has no correspondent type of category today. And those numbers, all of those statistics have changed over the years like that. But agriculture, yes, we've gone through, let me finish Sue's point here, was the research discovered this in 1936. That was when they first published. And so in 37 and 30, they got the Raw Materials National Council going, people all over the country trying to inform industry, agriculture, business, banking, publications, publishing, all over the country, investments, people, from New York to San Francisco, from Minneapolis to Houston, Texas. And they did a good job of teaching, and they got some support from NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. Each state has an ag department, and they have a head administrator, whether it's a secretary or director or administrator of agriculture for the state of New York, or the director of agriculture for the state of Michigan. So all those guys have a national organization, and so it's called NASDA. It still exists today. So Wilkin had some friends that got him in to speak with some NASDA folks. NASDA picked this right up and said, oh my gosh, let's run with this. So they helped him go to Congress and begin to testify about the information that they had found and published. And all of this was before December of 1941. And by the attack of the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, Congress was scared to death. Boom! You've just been militarily attacked without looking, and you are in deep doo-doo right now, boys. And they were scared, and they looked around for something to grab a hold of, because we'd been through 12 years of depression here. Didn't know how to make an economy stand up on its own feet and walk, much less fight a war that we had to win. It threatened our existence. And so they grabbed a hold of, what did they grab a hold of? And one of the things they grabbed a hold of was Carl Wilkins' testimony saying, if the price of raw materials at the first point of sale is in balance with the costs of labor and capital in the rest of the economy, you cannot have a depression. And that's the rule. Think of it. It describes the entire economic organization. If the price of raw materials at the first point of sale, when they first enter the economy, is in balance with the costs of labor and capital, which means net interest, in the rest of the economy, you cannot have a depression, because the wealth we produce puts the value in our money, and when that money is valued at the right price, it's in balance with the costs that we have to pay for labor and the costs we have to pay for money, then there's enough. There's enough money buying power from what we produced to pay for the labor of processing it and the cost of the money to finance it. When the price of raw materials at the first point of sale is in balance with the cost of labor and capital and the rest of the economy, you cannot have a depression. That's all it takes. That's regulating the value of money. That's what it says in the Constitution. Regulate the value of money. Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin. And how do you regulate the value of foreign coin? Do you know what they meant? Regulating the value of foreign coin is a tariff. That's how you regulate the value of foreign money. Because properly applied, a tariff is not a trade measure. It has nothing to do with trade. Who cares about trade? What we care about is capital crossing the boundary. Read Adam Smith. He said, you can't let capital, it's our capital. You can't let it cross the national boundary because it only means something here. Other people see it. They see our living conditions and they want it. They want it now and they don't want to wait to get it. We had to wait to get it. We had to pay for it. It's ours. We built it. It may not be all that pretty to us right now, but we built it nonetheless. Here it is. We can't let it cross national boundaries because that takes the value out of our money. And what we've done is simply let all the banker, international finance capitalist guys here capture the purchasing power of our own money, appropriate it to themselves, and carry it around the world, spreading hope and happiness to everybody who thinks they ought to have some. And they'll say, oh, sure, you can have some. Here, sign this. Sign this austerity guarantee so that you'll pay me forever and a day to get what I'm going to give you in the next 2 minutes. And that's what we do. We allow them to capture our wealth, our capital, our purchasing power, and sashay around the world, promising people a pie in the sky. It sickens me. It really sickens me. And the fact that it falls directly on our shoulders. It's us. It's our fault. We let them do it. It's ours. And we should have been more responsible.
So that means free trade is a pipe smoking dream.
There's never been free trade in the history of the world. Never. The only free trade that people might think actually happened was when somebody had a bigger gun. That's right. I've got a friend who lives in Monroe, Louisiana. His name is Fred Hunefeld. And he says, let me tell you a story. He says, I saw a guy walking down the sidewalk one time in New Orleans, and he passed an alleyway that was right behind him. And a guy ran out of the alleyway and clubbed him upside the head, knocked him flat, grabbed his wallet and watch, and ran off. The guy stood back up on his feet and said, I just been free traded.
So you said there's no such thing as actual free trade. What would that really be?
It's all managed trade. We all manage trade.
Well, what would real free trade be? Is there such a thing? Could it be?
Equitable? No, I don't think there is such thing as free trade. There's equitable trade or inequitable trade. That's what we have. We try to manage trade. We try to come up with these treaties and trade agreements and all this stuff. But usually what we do is we still believe in the beat the guy over the head method of negotiation. You know, what can we get for what they're willing to give up, and what do we not have to give up that we can fool them into thinking we already did or something. You know, it's all managed trade. It's whether it's managed to our national community benefit or whether it just favors a few, or one company, or one product, or, you know, and everybody gets on the list to try and get their name in so that we can get some special advantage here. That's what trade negotiations are all about. Well, I say, stop that.
Yeah, Randy, I want to ask you a quick question. When you were talking about when World War II starts, for the U.S. to enter.
Yes, I didn't finish that story, I guess.
Well, from the way I understood it, it sounded that they were trying to figure out what the parity was and keep it for a while as we entered the war. In a very overgeneralized way.
What they wanted was to stand the economy back up and start working again.
Right. Would those actions, would they be what were characterized often as price controls? In other words, was it equivalent to the government stepping in and saying, for the time being, we've got to keep wheat at this price, forget the market for a couple of years until 2 years after the war, then we'll go back to a market.
One of the things,
the market decides.
One of the things that happened during World War II was that the futures markets in the United States closed.
Okay. So
they were not ordered closed.
Okay, so here's my question for the gentleman.
They didn't have any work to do.
The gentleman earlier was asking about as the decades roll on and one industry might rise, another industry might fall. The idea is we allow a market to determine prices. We have, for example, commodities markets which decide put it in your language, what the parity should be for ag. And it could rise and fall depending on conditions in ag versus other
that's what we believe.
sectors.
Those are our beliefs. That's not reality, that's a belief.
Okay, so on the one hand, I see the market is deciding prices.
Right.
On the other hand, I see some kind of, what you suggest is almost like a natural law where there's some ratio that somehow it statistically has been shown to be pretty reasonable, and that we should use that ratio to determine the prices of some of our fundamental basic commodities.
Right, and we should do that only for the time being.
No, but what I'm hearing you say is that should be a continuous process. In other words, we shouldn't rely on a market to determine those ratios. We should rely on what you call parity.
Yeah, well, okay.
I'm confused.
I hear you. Yeah, well, I know what you're saying. You're asking about why should we try to calculate a price instead of letting free, uninterested, outcry auction participants discover the proper price. And the answer is, nobody's disinterested, because everybody eats. Everybody eats, everybody has a horse in this race. Everybody eats, everybody needs to consume food. In the outcry markets, the setting of the price of wheat, corn, soybeans, barley, cotton, orange juice, coffee, all the rest of this stuff is all conducted by remote control in quantities that do not and never will exist. You familiar with that? These are the realities of the commodities futures markets. The basic unit of trade is 10,000 bushels of corn, wheat, barley, soybean. 10,000 bushels. How many contracts of 10,000 bushels can be auctioned or traded on a commodity exchange in any given day is unlimited. We do not have supply of barley or corn or wheat. And all we ask them to do is to trade real stuff. And they won't do it. Wilkin himself asked them to trade And I've got a 1938 publication where he talks about having talked with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and asked them if they would begin trading wheat in real quantities that actually are proven to exist in the world today. And they said, go out of here, get out.
Randy, so the question that comes to my mind in hearing the discussions about free trade is whether or what effect would there be on, let's say, the need for any kind of a free trade agreement or anything like that if we had parity economic pricing and the other countries had parity economic pricing?
Right. If the purchasing powers of the currencies of two nations are equivalent, then there's no need for any tariff at all. It's an equitable basis. Our money buys the same kind of stuff their money buys. That's essentially what a parity tariff does. It equalizes the purchasing power of the currencies, and it does that by continually to look at the exchange rates. You know, so that what we calculate is how much did we need to earn when we sold that wheat to Egypt to pay ourselves the parity price, because we know what that is. And we know then how much we got for that wheat when we sold it to Egypt, so we know the difference that we didn't get. You know, so if we import anything, how are we going to get paid? We have to get something from Egypt. So we know that whatever we import from Egypt, that's how much we've got to add to the importation of whatever it is in order to cover that price for us.
But my point is, does that, and doesn't it render this whole concept of free trade agreements obsolete?
Yeah, I think so, pretty much. Yeah, it requires a honest look at the currencies and how they relate in the world. These days, that's one of the big things that's changed, I think, is the foreign exchange markets. Yeah, 95% of the dollar values of all the exchanges in the world, including the commodities exchanges, 95% of the volume has absolutely nothing to do with settlement of trade exchanges. 95% of the slosh of money going around the world is in trading currencies. Not goods, money.
Randy, your amusing anecdote about the gentleman that was slugged.
Yes, free trading.
Brought to mind, yes. Reminds me of another little anecdote from James Joyce.
Ah.
And the wonderful socialist.
Yeah.
And he was asked once what he thought of merchants.
Okay.
And he said, merchant? Isn't that someone who buys dear and sells cheap?
Thank you. I appreciate that one.
Randy, I myself have one last question. I think what would help people is, how does just one specific example of how the government, back during the parity period of 1942, 50, how did it set the parity price?
Right.
How does that work? Does that help me?
Okay. Well, you mean like how did in the market, to the farmer, you mean? How did the farmer deal with it? Yeah. Okay.
How did the farmer get his parity price?
Right, yeah. The functioning of the program itself was through what was called a commodity loan. In other words, there is an entity today, it still exists, called the CCC, the Commodity Credit Corporation. And the Secretary of Agriculture sits on the board of directors and things like that. But it's still an entity, it still has authority to conduct monetary operations on a certain basis. What they did was the government would offer, through the CCC, they would offer a loan. They would essentially send an agent. They didn't really have to send the guy. All they had to do was call him up and tell him what the parity loan rate was. And they'd say, okay, at whatever elevator, say I've got a truckload of wheat that I've got harvested and it's late July and I'm heading for my elevator, and I get to the elevator and I want to dump my wheat, and the man who owns and operates the elevator says, the parity rate, the parity loan rate is X number of dollars, $14.30. And he says, I say, Well, what that means is that I could dump my wheat in a government bin, a sealed bin that's dedicated to the storage of government-owned or government collateral grain, and take the loan, $14.30 from the government on the number of bushels that I've got, and I would get 90% of that $14.30. In other words, the parity loan is at 90%. I could get a loan of money from the federal government, which they would pay into existence through my signing the loan agreement. No debt. It's a paid money, paid into circulation, of 90% of $14.30 for the amount of bushels that I dump in that bin that's dedicated to the CCC. Now, if the elevator operator, it's his business, he has to keep a separate bin there. But if he wants any grain of mine, any wheat of mine, he has to bid at least that much or more, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to sell it to him. I can get 90% of $14.30 from the government guy. If the elevator operator wants some of my wheat that he can then bargain with and sell, he has to pay me at least a penny more than that. So in other words, the 90% parity loan puts a floor under the price of the commodity. And it's called a non-recourse loan because the crop is the sole collateral. They can't come back against my house, my tractors, my kids, my wife. They can't do that. It's a non-recourse loan. The only recourse you have is against the commodity itself as the collateral for the loan. Now, the deal is, it's a 90% parity loan, and the price in the marketplace still can fluctuate between 90% and 110% of parity. That's in the law as well. And so my loan, my $14, 90% of $14.30, whatever it might be, is callable. I have to pay that loan back if the market price hits parity, 100%. As soon as the parity price hits 100%, I can then, all that wheat that I dumped in the CCC bin becomes mine again. And I have to sell it. I have to sell it in the market. I have to sell it to the elevator operator. But he is now at parity. 10% more than what I got from the government CCC loan. So I can pay the CCC loan and have 10% still here. So that's how it works. It establishes a floor under the commodity. It produces the orderly marketing of the crops at parity prices. That's kind of how it works. Sounds arcane to explain it. It doesn't work that way. It works pretty smoothly. Worked pretty smoothly. Anything else?
Well, I just want to, it reminds me that in Athens, ancient Athens, when they had money reform to get a fair money,
Right.
one of the things they did is they put floor prices on agricultural products.
Right.
So they,
Yep.
parity worked back then.
Well, thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. And the next meeting of Money Talks is going to be sometimes next month. That's April. And we will post the information about the specific date and the speakers. Okay? Thank you very much, dear speakers. We had a very wonderful session. God bless you. Thank you.